Welcome, everybody. And today we're going to be talking with Niko. And Niko has a really interesting story to share with us. So, Niko, welcome today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm actually in the US. I live in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. Okay, so I know you have a story about change to share with us. So, do you want to just tell us a little bit about what your situation was and what it looked like before you decided to make a change?
Yeah, it's funny because it's a very long story, so I'm going to try to shorten it as much as possible for this podcast because we could talk for hours. But essentially, I did not realize that I had a family system that was very toxic, and I was trying to navigate, relationships in my family. From a perspective of thinking that I needed to be the one to fix the relationships and make everyone happy and people pleasing. And I was kind of living in a world where I was doing a lot of personal development, and I've been in healing and transformation for like 30 years. But I had gone into kind of a deep level of healing personally, where I was doing a lot of work with like Joe Dispenza. I was meditating. I was in energy psychology certification at EFT Universe with Dawson Church. I was doing a lot of deep work on my own. And I think what really happened was my brain changed. Like I literally had, and I was able to see things that I couldn't actually see before. And when this happened, it wasn't like it happened overnight, but when I had a realization that I was seeing things that needed to change, it did seem like really fast. Where one day I saw some behaviors in my family. I was like, oh no, this is this is not okay. Right. And when that happened, there was something in me that it wasn't, honestly, it wasn't like a conscious choice. It was just like a switch flipped, and it flipped, and it was just like I knew. I was like, that's it. It's over. I'm not doing this anymore.
Can I ask you just on that? So, did you notice this kind of behavior as a child, or was it when you were an adult?
Yeah, it absolutely was when I was an adult, because when I was a child, it did, we don't know what we don't know. And we think what's happening in our own family is just what is normal. And that's what happens with trauma is the brain, creates what's called trauma capsules. And we create like a way of coping with our world by not seeing things that are off, or not allowing ourselves to acknowledge that something feels wrong. So we just, to protect ourselves, we decide that it's normal, it's okay. And until we start to do work where either we're changing like our internal world, or we're seeing other people have different experiences, and we say, wait a minute, wait a second here. That's not what I experienced. And we start questioning, because it's the questioning that's powerful, is when you start questioning, saying, wait a minute, you know, is this really actually how I've been seeing it? So that's kind of what happened to me. Was I started questioning, and then the answers started coming, and I started seeing what the true impact it was having on me.
Can you have you got any examples you can give us of the kind of things that you perhaps saw through one lens before you became aware, and then you realize, this is not, acceptable, or what kind of situations were there?
Well, I think it's I mean, not to really like call out any specific person, but just to say that like in my family, I was accepting behaviors from people that were pretty rude and undermining, and I was being gaslit a lot. And I don't know if you're familiar with the word gaslighting, but yeah, okay. So it's just like essentially being very confused about what's really happening in a relationship, where maybe I'm being criticized and judged in one moment, and then in the next moment I'm being praised, or I'm being told that the way I remember things is not true, and that that's not how it happened. So I never really questioned that as being not okay until those are the things I started to see. I started to see the inconsistencies, and I was able to say, wait a minute, you're saying this over here, but the next day you say this, and or you're criticizing me and judging me for wanting to have boundaries in my life, or even, I'm experiencing this success and I'm happy, and you're actually not happy for me. You actually don't want me to be happy. You actually want me to be miserable, and you're accusing me of not caring about you because I'm not miserable. So things like that I started to see as not okay.
And do you think that the other person that was, doing this, do you think they were aware of that, or is it kind of just the way that were unaware of their behavior?
I mean, the truth, that's a really good question, because in the beginning, that actually is something that people really focus on a lot, my clients especially. And what I like to tell them, and I'll answer it by saying what I tell my clients is that actually the healing comes from turning away from trying to figure out what someone else is thinking or why they were thinking it or if they knew they were doing it. Because when we do that, we're saying that I still need this person to be different for me to be okay. And so when we heal, we turn within and we focus on how we're feeling. And we focus on our experience of other people's behavior in our life. And we decide how we want to feel. Like we have to decide, okay, who do I want to be around? And what kind of relationships do I want to be in? And because everyone is participating in a relationship voluntarily. So we're in a dynamic. So if somebody's behaving towards us in a harmful way and we're participating, we're actually part of that dynamic. So I think the better question to ask is, how am I participating in this dynamic? And am I aware of what I'm doing? And then I think later, if you find the answer to that question, maybe it's revealed, maybe not, but it doesn't matter anymore whether they thought they knew they were doing it or not.
Yeah. So it's really realizing that we can't change other people. The only people we can change is us. The only person we can change is ourselves. So, and before we get to kind of what you did differently, what advice do you give then to somebody who, has someone in their life who perhaps they can't just walk away from, or it's not that obvious that to be able to do that. What do you give to them to manage that situation?
Yeah, I think that the first thing I would do is start, like I said, turn within and start looking at yourself and start accessing any kind of resources or help that you can get to work on your internal world. And I mean, in my work, I'm an expert in reparenting the inner child and in using EFT to facilitate healing trauma. And so for me, the work is to reparent your inner child and do that so that you're interacting with people in your world, not from your wounded inner child, but from your resourced, coherent adult self. And when you do that, then that is actually going to have an effect on how you're perceiving the people in your world and their behavior. So like either people, when you start doing it's essentially like boundary work and releasing codependency. And when you start doing that work and you start having solid boundaries, then the people in your life are either going to respect your boundaries and start shifting, or they're just going to leave your orbit. They're just, somehow it's not going to be impacting you anymore.
So you said that you'd done some personal development work, and that's when your awareness was raised and you became aware that something needed to change. So what did you do to make that change?
Yeah, so I did several things, but essentially the first thing I did is I decided that I was going to have different boundaries with my family. And essentially I just did. I created new boundaries, and I started really focusing on myself. I started really focusing on my healing and also what was going well in my life, and focusing on, developing. At the time I was really in the middle of developing my online business, and I was starting to get success and clients, and a lot of great things were happening. So I was just highly focused on myself, and I gave myself permission to do that and not feel like I needed to um basically be responsible for other people's healing and other people's being okay with their life.
And how did other people react to? Did they notice that you'd done something different? And what was their reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in my situation, I changed. I mean, I went no contact with some people, and so obviously they noticed because that was the choice that I made, and everyone's situation's different. I mean, the truth is, I made that decision based on working with a therapist who was an expert in the area that I was having trauma around, and also having lots of colleagues and peers in the coaching world, and doing all kinds of courses and following people that are experts in the field. So I made that decision based on what was right for me and my specific case. So everybody is different. That's why I say, like, there's a lot of controversy around the idea of no contact with family. And I just tell people that it's such a personal decision, and it's something that nobody makes that decision just lightly. Because typically when you make that decision, it's gotten so bad over the years, you've tried and tried and tried, and you've gotten to the point where it's like your well-being is in jeopardy, and you have to remove yourself from a situation that's harmful so you can protect yourself while you're healing.
And what difference has that made to you now?
Oh my God, it's like night and day. I mean, honestly, it's just been, I mean, I won't say that it was just easy breezy, because there was a period of where I went through where, this is what happens is you go into your internal world after you remove the influences in your external world that are toxic. And then you find out that it's in here too. It's in here, it's in me, it lives in me. And so that was when the real work began. And that's when I went really deep into healing the inner child, reparenting the inner child in therapy. Lots of, I had a lot of colleagues, so I had so much support. I did work with releasing ancestral trauma, generational trauma, just so much deep work over a period of years. And my life is so different now. I mean, my nervous system, my health, my financial wealth, like everything in my life has made it's literally like a 360.
And do you think, is it something that you think you could ever, go back and repair, kind of have more contact again, or is it a fluid situation? You don't know really until you know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, that is something I teach in boundaries, is that when you make a decision to modify the contact level you have with anyone in your life, you have to remember that this is not a permanent decision and that it's not written in stone, and boundaries are meant to be flexible. So you learn to shift and change your own boundaries with anyone in your life based on how you're feeling at any given moment and what's happening in your environment. So I think that it's something that just has to be lived. Like, you have to live through it, and you have to decide as you go. If something shows up and you're like, okay, maybe a person shows up in your life and differently, and you feel different, and you feel like no matter what happens in this external relationship, I'm responsible for how I feel about it. I think when you get to that point, and if you see changes in people in your world, then maybe you can change the boundaries. But it's hard to answer that question, because, it's so personal. It's so
Mhm.
personal.
And so that experience that you've had, um, how has that influenced the work that you do now?
Oh, it's absolutely like the basis of the influence, because of the fact that when I went through it and I realized how long I had gone without any even awareness of what was happening or any support around it, I realized that it was my mission to help other people to understand, this whole idea of this certain kind of narcissistic trauma and being in narcissistic relationships and reparenting the inner child and going no contact is such a huge thing. So that was what I decided I was going to help other people with. So, I mean, it literally is what I do now in my work. It's like what I live and breathe. So,
And that the work about reparenting the inner child, can you just describe that kind of as briefly as you can, really, what that actually means for people?
yeah, yeah. Reparenting is a concept in inner child healing. And it obviously it has a basis in modern psychology in this framework. And it's actually very simple. Reparenting is when you work with what they call a part of self in psychology, and an inner child part is a part of self. So the idea is that we have inner child parts that are what are considered to be frozen in the past. Literally, they're frozen, as in they are living from the past, and we are actually responding to our world presently from that past child self. And so when we reparent, we as our adult selves become the parent that that child needed. So we meet the needs that they didn't get met. We give them the unconditional love, support. We give them the validation. We give them whatever it is they needed. We give it to them as the parent they didn't have. And by doing that, this child part comes into the present moment with us. And hopefully what's called integration is you get some integration where you realize that, you still have I think you always have inner child parts, but your adult self remains coherent most of the time. And you're coming from a place of being the grown up in your life. And so it's like a massive difference in the way you feel in your daily life and how you interact with people in your world and how you see yourself as either being the victim or being empowered. So it's a big paradigm shift.
Mm, fascinating, fascinating. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it's you've given us a lot of food for thought there. And when you look back at your journey, do you have a piece of wisdom or a favorite quote or something that reflects that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just say, like, the one thing I want people to take away from this would be that if you feel like something is off, then it is. So it's about learning to trust yourself and just start getting curious. Start asking questions about what might be off here, and just start being curious and being open to learning what you need to learn to make changes in your life, to make your life better.
Thank you. Thank you. That's been really enlightening. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us today, Niko. It's been a
You're
pleasure talking
welcome.
with you.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.